Okay, the bell has tolled. Welcome to First Universalist Church of New Madison. On this almost oppressive summer day, luckily we were blessed with a rain shower that cooled things off, and hopefully it'll help the corn unroll their leaves. Corn likes warm weather, but it doesn't like warm weather in the 90s over and over and over without rain, so that's a pretty tough one. All right, do we have any announcements?
Just a reminder of our union service with Laredo. That's Sunday, July 7th, and it won't take place here at the church, but it'll take place in City Park, which we reserve. Regular time, 10 o'clock. And
when you say City Park, meetings are not regular.
That's right. This part in Madison.
Under the water tower, or past the water tower.
Yeah. And then also remember on July 21st, as we do most annually, we'll have our annual meeting. We'll talk a little more about closure type things and that kind of stuff. As well as that business.
Okay, so the 7th is our union service. It's going to be kind of a brunch type thing. If you want to bring something, please do. But we'll have pretty much everything supplied that we need to make them happy. Derek will be providing a message, and we'll proceed from there. It's pretty warm today. I don't know, we need to get a group opinion. If it's going to be in the 90s some Sunday, do we want to just say everybody go to El Dorado instead of coming here? Today we were lucky because we opened the doors and got the fans turned on. It was stifling in here because it was all closed up, but at least it was fairly nice outside. So once we got the air moving, it's fairly comfortable in here now. But if it's going to be 95 outside, it's not going to be very comfortable in here. So let us know. Make a decision or whatever, and we could. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to have us over there. It'd be a lot cooler.
Tim, I would be able to come if we were going to be an air conditioning day. If it gets up around 85, I'd stay home because I told the chorus that they have an outdoor concert, and I told them if it's 85 or above, I won't be there because so that would help me get come if we were in air conditioning.
put in a prayer request for a little rain shower every Sunday morning about 9 o'clock. We'll see how that works. My brother's memorial service was yesterday, Saturday at 3 in the afternoon in Bloomington, Illinois, which for your information is a 4-hour drive from here. So it was 4 hours over. Memorial service at his son's house. His wife and the family are all Christian Scientists. If anybody is curious about Christian Science, that was an experience and a half. It was kind of like Quakers without the Quaker sensibilities. But anyway, it was an interesting service, and we had to leave early to get back last night because we had to prepare for today. So, but first, the Christian Scientist is an interesting thing. They read from Mary Baker's the book of Christian Science, and that was pretty hard to follow. It was pretty much all over the place. Okay, I don't mean to disparage other, because what I was getting to is my wife said, where I said when we left, I don't think I can do Christian Science. They seem to be all over the board. And she says, yeah, they're just like Unitarians. Hey, wait a minute. Is that like what is that? Okay. Our prelude. My shepherd will provide my needs. My shepherd will provide my needs. Thank you for the blessing of music. If you're wondering about what our thing is today, what our slideshow is today, and what our topic, I'm sure you all know this is Juneteenth. Last week was Juneteenth, the 19th. That celebrates the coming of the Emancipation Proclamation to the slaves in Texas, which didn't happen until 1865, about 2 or 3 months after the armistice was signed. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But it usually happens to me when I look up something on Google and then there's another thing down below and another thing below that. Pretty soon I'm all over the map.
2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 years?
2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, if you want to know the facts, if you look it up, something didn't happen for years and years after that. And a lot of times it was rolled back. I'll give you the brief. In North Carolina, they had the Reconstruction after the Civil War, where the slaves were given 40 acres and a mule. They're split up the plantations. when kind of doing the sermon right now, but when Lincoln was assassinated, who was the vice president that became the president? Andrew Johnson from Tennessee. He was considered trying to bring in the border states. He stopped basically Reconstruction. All those slaves that had their 40 acres, they were all booted off those 40 acres. Some of them were there for 6 months. Some of them, the longest they were there was a year and a half, but none of them kept their property. They were all booted off, and some of the things that happened to them, they were harassed, arrested. You've heard about the lynchings and the beatings, but some of them were arrested on false charges, sentenced to chain gangs. The chain gangs were sold to the plantation owners, so they basically were arrested on false charges, taken to jail. The plantation owners paid the jail, and then they worked out their sentence on the plantation exactly like they were slaves. And now they're slaves, legally slaves. And if you watch how the conservative legislatures work in the states, including Ohio, it's exactly the same process. They pass whatever laws they want, and they make the laws fit the situation that they want to fit. So, and what this is referring to is a gentleman in Virginia, Randolph, freed his slaves, just like George Washington and all the rest. He didn't free them until he died, and then he gave them their freedom. Virginia passed a law that I'm just running off here, no freed slaves could live in Virginia. So they all had to migrate to some other state. His estate sent a lawyer up here, and they bought 3,000 acres in Mercer County, and they sent 358 slaves, women, children, and men, to this property to take control of their property, and we'll go into why that didn't happen either. So, chalice lighting for dark and the light. May we light this chalice this morning to remind us of the power and beauty of balance and contrast. It is darkness that can make the flame of a single candle so powerful, and the light that deepens those shadows in turn. The chalice flame is the meeting point, the union of the refuge, safety, and incredible beauty of darkness, and the warmth, the assurance, and the joy of light. May this act of lighting our chalice this morning remind us that we are stronger together in all the complexities and the disagreements of relationships, because we are different and because we are one. Opening hymn is 65. Attuned to this week, a prayer for white people, sheltered in our homes or going to work at risk for week after week after week. We're edgy, tired, a little raw. We're tender, vulnerable, open, a little more open than usual. Those of us who are white who before might have been distracted, who before might have been too busy, who before might have been preoccupied with our lives, are noticing the ways injustice has happened to people of color. The same way again and again and again. Now we have become aware. Please, may we be aware. May we not lose awareness. May we not get distracted. May we not turn away. May we open, really open. Accepting the invitation to change, really change our minds, our hearts, our world. When we encounter calls to defund the police, when we encounter calls for reparations, when we hear follow our lead from people of color, may we listen, may we learn, may we be open. Even if it means rethinking everything you thought you knew about the world. We have, all of us as humans, an enormous opportunity to change one of the oldest injustices in history, to change everything. May we stay vulnerable, may we stay tender, may we take action. Eyes and hearts and minds open. Right, joys and concerns. We have our sunflowers for Ukraine, maintains in the news. The Russians are using some kind of new bomb, like 6,000 pounds. It's huge. It's what they've done is take unguided missiles and put wings on them. So when they're launched from an airplane from a safe distance, they actually become a guided missile, and they're huge. And that is destroying huge sections of innocent civilian areas in Ukraine. So things are progressively getting worse. Israel, I'm sure you followed the news there. The assault on Palestine continues. 40 or 50 people killed in one strike yesterday. The Israelis now are saying, actually went on TV and said the United States is not providing them the materials they need, which is, according to the United States, not true. The only thing they held up, and they didn't stop it, they just paused it for a while, was the 2,000-pound bombs. Wondering why Israel needed 2,000-pound bombs to drop on habitated areas where there might be two terrorists and 300 civilians. It doesn't seem appropriate. The flowers, I'll bring in flowers every day for that. So. Israel, Ukraine, hopefully Dolly's doing well. Have you heard whether she's on her ship or the cruise is?
I had an email from Dolly this week, and she just basically said she did not mention that she joined one to Belfast to get on the ship, so I said she is still in Tenerife, which is the Canary Islands.
Right.
But she did send her regards to everyone, and I think she might be getting a little lonesome for news at home, so if anyone wants her email address, it's actually in the line that she did each week with the church service bulletin. But she's going to be glad to hear from you. I think she has email access. And so feel free to email Dolly and wish her the best and ask her all about Tenerife or possibly Belfast or possibly, let's keep our fingers crossed, she will eventually get on the ship that is, I think, still in Madison.
Still right now. I'll see if I can't figure out how to I'll post a link to the YouTube site so she can actually watch the service if she wants. We need to light a candle. I guess I need to be lighting candles for these. We need to light a candle for the earth. This has been a week, if you've watched the news, heat over almost the whole entire United States. 110 degrees in Arizona, but 101 degrees in Maine. That just shocked everybody. Not only heat, but floods. The South particularly is in floods, but not just in Florida. Also Alabama has had floods. Texas has had floods. And to complicate that, fire. New Mexico has a huge fire going on. So when you start talking heat, fire, and flood, you're talking Armageddon. You're talking end of the world, end times type stuff. So I'm not sure if that's going to spur any awareness of people. I think Florida is beginning to see what's going on. The insurance prices are going astronomically high in Florida because of all the dangers and the damages. So all the people that moved down there to retire and bought real estate they're finding their real estate on the coast may not be worth the millions of dollars they thought it was. So we'll see how that works out. Anything else?
I'm real grateful for the rain.
Yes.
It's a joy. And to expand on that a little bit, I heard somebody on the news say something about that this area was close to a drought. Well, maybe that's technically true, but if you go out in places in the West, it's just like that guy in the movie said, now this is a knife. Now that's drought. We don't have drought here. In fact, we're blessed to have rain much more than other places. So it's a joy to me that we have it every day. It's a joy that we have it as often as we do. And to expand on your last thought there about the earth, we humans, we're getting what we asked for and all that stuff. We're supposed to be the most intelligent beings on this earth, and it's not the Armageddon you're talking about. That's not the end of the earth. The earth will go on. It's just that humans will have a lot of trouble if it gets worse due to climate. So, and I'm not so sure that for life in general would be a bad thing if humans just went a mistake. I mean, for life in general, it would be the greatest thing that happens to the rest of the earth. It's happened to us since we started up about 400,000 years ago. So, and the humans they lived in harmony with nature all the way up until 400 years ago. So really, you can't say Cro-Magnon man was bad in some way. He lived in harmony with nature. That talked about an apocalypse. That's an apocalypse for humans. The earth is still going and life will probably still going.
But it's not just humans. If you watch how many birds are being killed, if you actually look outside and see, if you pay attention, you don't hear birds singing the way you used to. Used to be flocks of mourning doves all over. When we change the environment, we change it for everybody. I showed you the picture last week of the farm fields with no fence rows, no pheasants, no quail, no rabbits, no foxes that prey on the rabbits. Now we're getting coyotes, which are coming in because they can prey on your dogs and family dogs and cats. So we don't just change our world, we change the world for everybody. And when I talk about Armageddon, it's not because we're destroying the world, it's the suffering that goes along with it. People that are flooded out of their houses, people that are burned out of their houses, the number of people dying of heat because they're homeless and they have no place to get out of the heat. We're increasing human suffering when we have the ability and the resources to reduce human suffering. And that is what I don't understand, is why some people have an attraction to make other people suffer. And that seems to be a real conservative talking point. They don't deserve this, they don't deserve that, they shouldn't get medical care, they shouldn't get free housing, they shouldn't get an air-conditioned place to relax. They shouldn't be allowed to park their car and sleep in their car on city streets. You can go on and on and on. The whole point of everything is punishment. You change people's behavior by forcing them, by punishing them. And if that worked, we've had the death penalty for years and years and years. Nobody would kill anybody, but we seem to be killing people still right and left. So I don't think punishment is actually the real effective approach. So, on my high horse again.
That was my fault.
No, it's not. And I really appreciate interaction, and each one of you has the ability to come up here and present something that you feel strongly about. I'll give you the pictures for the background. Nobody's going to criticize you. Nobody's going to judge you. Everybody would appreciate hearing somebody else's thoughts but mine, I'm sure. So, and plus, if you know anybody who wants to speak, thinking seriously about going back to the nature center. What's your opinion? What I would tell them is, we want you to come and speak, and we have Facebook, but you may only be speaking at the National Park, Dark County Parks. There may only be like 4 people here. If you don't think that's a waste of your time, those of us that are here would appreciate having you come here. So I'm going to extend an invitation to them and see, what they say. We had that set up before COVID, and then she said she didn't want to do it because of COVID, but maybe they'd be willing to do it now. So, and by the way, the Bash and Fish is going on today in Greenville. You might enjoy that. It's on Ohio Street. It's a big setup. So, and Dark County Parks is something that I have not seen anywhere else. For a small county like this, the Dark County Park system is pretty incredible. And the programs that they put on and the staffing that they have. And part of the thing I found in through here, and we'll probably talk about that later, there is an actual plaque at the Shawnee Center about the Shawnee Indian tribe. Tecumseh was in this area. And there's a bunch of Indiana or Ohio history that's there, and actually there's been some more history on Fort Jefferson. It's been in the Early Bird, so we may talk about that too. Fort Jefferson is just up the road, and some pretty amazing things happened at Fort Jefferson too. So, okay, our last candle for those joys and concerns that haven't been mentioned, maybe we're unable to mention, maybe we don't even know what they are. Children's, actually, let me go to the next one. We talked before about the Clemens farm out on Stingley Road. That was another group of slaves that came up from the south. And the difference is, the strange thing is, in Mercer County, the slaves, the Randolph slaves that were freed and came up by canal boat to New Bremen and got off the boat. The citizens of Mercer County met them with rifles and shotguns and forced them to leave and go and leave there. They took their land before they even settled their land. And where those people went was they went to the village in Miami County called Rossville. If you know where Rossville is in Piqua, that was actually settled by black slaves from Randolph, Virginia, the Randolph slaves from Virginia. And they stayed there for years and years and years. It wasn't exactly equitable. They were still treated as lower class citizens, but they made their way by washing clothes, by mending clothes, by doing manual labor, and they were paid for that. And just like the families that settled at Longtown, that town has basically disappeared, and Longtown has basically disappeared. We may have to do some sociological investigation. Those were sturdy farming families. They were accepted in the area, and they were successful, and yet they all drifted away, and the properties are it's no longer a black or integrated settlement. Same thing with the Randolph settlement. It's no longer, it's there, but it's not the same situation that it was when it was founded. I don't have an answer for that. So something we may look into. This is just a multicolored hands forming the heart, just for your observation. And let's see. Juneteenth is a separate thing, but there's not too much to talk about it exactly as what happened on Juneteenth.
So that Pulitzer Prize winner, Nicole Hannah Jones, she turned the tables on establishment historians by writing that now famous essay in August 2019 in the New York Times Magazine that a motive for the revolt against British rule in 1776 was the desire to preserve forevermore the system of enslavement, which is why the Confederates in 1861 considered themselves to be walking in the footsteps of real estate speculator George Washington. This also helps to explain why black people today are treated so atrociously, because unlike some, black people then, and mostly now, did not engage in class collaboration. They did not side with their slave masters, their slaveholders, in a slaveholders revolt that led to the creation of the slaveholders republic. And when you fight a war and lose, as black people did in 1776, you can expect to be pulverized and penalized forevermore until you can turn the tables, which we began to do with the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804. Juneteenth also needs to be seen in the context of a larger scheme by slaveholders in Texas. You all know, I'm sure, that we celebrate Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, which marks a time when Mexicans rose up against the French puppet ruler, King Maximilian. Recall as well that Texas had seceded from Mexico in 1836 and became an independent republic, not least because Mexico had moved towards abolition of slavery in the 1820s under a president of indigenous and African descent, speaking Vicente Guerrero. So the idea for the enslavers in 1865 was to try to return to Mexico under French rule and extend the lease on life of slavery. This plot, this scheme may have succeeded, but for an uprising by the Mexican people that drove Maximilian out of office, leading to his execution, that was joined by black soldiers, including an early black historian, George Washington Williams. You may want to consult the biography of him by the late historian John O. Franklin. And it presents a remarkable story of black-brown unity against white supremacy that I think we can learn from.
And so take it forward from there and explain first what exactly Abraham Lincoln signed with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, why it took 2 years for enslaved people in Texas to learn of this. But even with this Emancipation Proclamation, it did not free enslaved people in places like Kentucky and places like Delaware and Maryland.
You have to see the Emancipation Proclamation as a war-fighting measure. Its remit did not necessarily extend to slaveholders who remained true to the Lincoln government. Its remit did extend to states like Texas, where the United States did not enjoy meaningful sovereignty. Then the larger point is that there's evidence to suggest that even after June 19, 1865, unpaid labor of Africans continued at least for months, perhaps longer. We still need research on that. And in any case, a kind of neo-slavery erupted, speaking of the convict lease system, whereby black men in particular were arrested on a flimsy pretext and then were leased out in mass to plantations where they formerly had been enslaved laborers. So this whole story of Juneteenth is much more complicated and much more complex than is traditionally presented. But having said that, once again, I salute those who are pushing for a federal holiday with regard to Juneteenth, because it provides an opportunity to have a thorough remembrance of this horrific system that was slavery.
All right, that gives you a brief overview from a radical historian. I'm not sure we want to accept everything that he says about his interpretations, but it is something you need to consider. The fact that the slaves revolted in 1776 and were punished for that, I'm not sure I can verify that with historical facts. But the Juneteenth thing is actually true. The Emancipation Proclamation only extended to slave states. Any, like Kentucky, that was not a slave state, did not join the Confederacy. Those slaves were not freed until the 13th Amendment, which was after the war. And I showed the movie here. I don't think anybody saw it, but there's a movie called Lincoln, which was about the passage of the 13th Amendment and the difficulty they had in doing that. That was a very interesting time in politics. But the same thing happened in Texas. The slaves weren't freed until 1865. That was the 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. But why is that a surprise? I mean, if you're in enemy territory and the government says the slaves are free, you're not going to say, oh, okay, Lincoln says I have to free the slaves, you can all leave now. They're not going to do it until they're forced to do it. And the result was it didn't happen until the Union Army showed up and said the slaves are free. And then the slaves said, well, what are we going to do? And the Union Army said, you need to be paid for your labor. Well, then with the Southern government, with Reconstruction, the Southerners were basically given their citizenship back. They were still allowed to put up statues of Southern generals and Robert E. Lee, the president, vice president of the Confederacy. They named streets after them. They named colleges after them. The whole Southern kind of lost cause thing kind of came up. and became part of American history until actually the 60s. And that's when the actual process of trying to create true freedom began. And what is happening now? After they changed the names of some military bases that were named for Southern generals, or changed the names of some, particularly 2 high schools in Virginia that were named for Confederate generals, and actually slave-holding Confederate generals. The names were changed to neutral names. Now the school board, a conservative school board was elected, and they changed the names back to the Confederate generals' names. So progress is not a straight line. Progress ebbs and flows. It's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. So we need to pay attention in how that is continuing. Let me give you an example. Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, South Carolina, and North Carolina. What do they have in common? They do not recognize Juneteenth. It is a federal holiday, and mail doesn't go. Anything that's connected to the federal government doesn't go. What did they do in those states? Instead of calling it Juneteenth, it's still a federal holiday and it's a state holiday, but it's Robert E. Lee Day. Oh. They changed the name of the holiday in their state, and they gave their state workers the day off. But everybody is celebrating General Jackson Day or Robert E. Lee Day, or the Vice President. I can't remember the Vice President's name of the Confederacy, but he also has a day named for him in Mississippi, I think. So the ways that they do it, and we've talked before about poll tax, all the ways that voting is restricted, that is still going on. The interesting thing was this freed slaves spread out and headed north. The Quakers, interestingly enough, had something to do with almost all these. This town in Piqua, outside of Piqua, had a strong Quaker support. Fountain City with Levi Coffin was a underground railroad stopping point, but the Quakers in Richmond helped Longtown. They helped that community survive. And they still have, at the Earl Library, the Quaker Library, they still have a lot of information on Longtown. So anyway, these are the Randolph, and this is an actual picture. They still have the reconstructed canal in New Bremen, if you're ever up that way. So they came up by canal boat, which there's a lot, I got kind of tied into that. Let me go back to that a little bit. The removal of Native Americans by the 1795 Treaty of Greenville opened Ohio to Europeans who sought opportunity and relief from political unrest in Europe. So Ohio became a state in 1803. Northwest Territory began to attract many settlers. Word spread quickly, and that land was available next to the Great Black Swamp, which is what borders up on New Bremen and heads north. The northern Germans knew their expertise to build canals and drain swamps would make the area the rich farmland they could manage. So Germans came to that area in droves and are still there in droves. Before the Europeans came, the native people had established trade routes and hunting traditions in northwest Ohio, one of which is the Auglaize Trail, which basically parallels Route 66. It began as an Indian trading path. The Indians recognized the significance of the water flow and used the land between the Miami River and Piqua and the St. Mary's River in St. Mary's as a portage between the waterways. The trappers and traders and soldiers were also dependent on these passageways. The new state of Ohio soon realized that the need for better transportation system was there. They did a feasibility study in 1823, and they set up a canal system. One of the sites selected for the Miami-Erie Canal was the often used portage across the divide of the old Auglaize Trail and the future site of the New Bremen. 12,000 years ago, during the Ice Age, a glacier covered 2/3 of Ohio as the ice melted and the glacier carved into the topography. The continental divide occurred just south of New Bremen. All the water north of what we know as Amsterdam Road in New Bremen flows north to Lake Erie, and from there to the St. Lawrence River. The water to the south of New Bremen flows down to the Ohio River and on the way to the Gulf of Mexico via the Mississippi River. At New Bremen at Lock 1, which is what this is, the elevation is 516 feet above the Ohio. At Cincinnati, and the elevation from Lake Erie and Toledo is 374 feet. The Loramie Summit is a tract of land 21 miles long from Lockington to New Bremen, and the modern-day New Bremen, the gentle slope is barely noticeable, but canal engineers faced a daunting task of designing and constructing a series of locks and feeder lakes to regulate the level. You know how locks work on canals or connections. The boat goes in, the door is closed, the water comes in from the high side to raise it up, and the boat goes into the high side. Or the boat goes in, they pump the water out, the boat sinks down to the low side, but the doors on the locks, which is what these are, have to open and close to raise and lower these boats. I think I've got it here somewhere. The connection, the reason they did this was it cost tons of money to ship goods by wagon and horses from Ohio down to Cincinnati, to even drive hogs down to Cincinnati for slaughter. The canals cut that price in half. And the canals lasted for about 20 years until what happened? Railroads. Railroads were even cheaper than canals and even faster than canals and even easier because railroads spread out everywhere. And you can see around here, there's abandoned rail tracks. There used to be railroad tracks practically in everybody's house almost. You could just walk out your door and catch a trolley to Dayton or to Greenville or Richmond or wherever else. So that pretty much obviated the reason of existence for canals, because canals were slow and they only went one direction. And the one other problem with canals was, back in the old days, they actually used to have winter. So the canals would freeze and you can't run a canal boat on top of the ice. It didn't have skates. So they were a tremendous boon when they were in the middle of the transition between horses and buggies and trains, but that's why they didn't last very long. The construction of the canal began in 1825 and completed in 1845. The immigrants from Germany, Ireland, and France built the canal. That included almost 250 miles of canal and reservoirs. Lake Loramie and Grand Lake St. Mary's are two of the reservoirs they used. How do you know Grand Lake St. Mary's is a reservoir? Because it's only 4 feet deep. And that's the reason St. Mary's looks the way it does. Well, the main reason it looks the way it does is because of all the turkey farms and chicken farms that spread the manure on the ground and let the rain wash it into the 4 foot deep lake. There's not enough activity to take care of the algae that forms, so you get an algae green bloom. I have a picture of some idiot on a ski-doo doing a turn in Lake St. Mary's, and the wave that he's kicking up is literally green. It's emerald green. It's solid algae from under the bottom. I've seen reports of dogs that have gone in and lapped the water out of the lake and gotten sick and had to be taken to the vet because the water is that stagnant and that difficult. So how they maintain boating up there or restaurants on the lake or anything, I'm not sure how that happens. That will tell you the strength of agribusiness in Ohio versus the strength of tourism. And if you've seen the remediation efforts they use, they have little paddle boats that go across the lake constantly throwing out limestone, because limestone sweetens the acidity of the algae and tries to clear the lake up. It's a kind of a backstop effort that is not really totally successful. It's still not a place I would want to go up and swim. So, hard work and tools were used to dig this miracle ditch, defied all the critics by overcoming the obstacles of the terrain. Trees were felled, stumps pulled, they moved earth without any modern machinery. Even horses were scarce, so the dirt from the canal was hauled by men pushing wheelbarrows. The canal connected Toledo at Lake Erie to Cincinnati at the Ohio River and shortened the trip from 5 weeks needed to travel through the woods and swamps to a quick 5 days on a canal boat. So you can see why it's successful and why they supported the purchase of it. The men who dug the canal worked from sunrise to sunset for 30 cents a day. They worked in miserable conditions in water that was infested with snakes, mosquitoes, and sewage. Many became ill with malarial fever and died. The dead were buried on the towpath on the side of the canal, and it is referred to as Ohio's longest cemetery. It ran from Toledo to Cincinnati, people buried all along the edge. Some of the subcontractors believed that whiskey neutralized the effects of the diseases, so they offered their workers a jigger of whiskey at sundown. Why? You have to work all day to get your drink. The boss who offered the most whiskey had the most workers. Those guys weren't stupid either. Canal engineers use a series of 105 locks to raise and lower the boats. The locks are typically smaller than the main channel and measure 90 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 12 to 20 feet deep. How many of you have been to the park in Pickla, just north of Pickla, Heritage Farm? They have an actual canal boat there, and you can get rides on the canal boat pulled by a horse, so it's exactly the way the canal was in those days. I don't know if you want to do a group trip over there. We can go over there and eat somewhere and take a ride on the canal boat. They also have a really interesting museum at the name of the place is a farm.
Johnson Farm.
What is
Johnson.
it? Johnson, yeah, the Johnson Farm. They have a really interesting museum there with a lot of Indian artifacts. I've not been there for like 30 years, so I wouldn't mind going back. And there's a lot of interesting places in Pickla to visit too. So if anybody's interested in that, let me know. Large wooden gates built to hold the water. The boat would enter the lock through the wooden gate. The gate would close. A wicket or opening in the front gate would open. The water allowed to raise or lower to equalize it at the next level. Then they would open. The boat would move on. Dimensions of the lock were standard: 4 feet deep, 40 feet wide, and the bottom of the sides of the canal sloped inward to the bottom width of 26 feet. The base of the waterway was trampled by people and animals to compact the soil so it would hold water. So all of this is done completely by hand. Canal boats were designed specifically to travel in the canal. The boats were 70 to 80 feet in length, 14 feet wide. There were 4 types of boats. The freight boat carried bulk freight such as coal or crops. The packet boat carried only people. The cargo and passenger boat carried both. There were goods at the center of the boat and people at each end. A state boat was the governor's boat. It was a fancy passage boat and reserved for dignitaries. I'm sure Governor DeWine probably has one in the garage right now. Boats traveled about 5 miles an hour and were usually powered by 3 mules in tandem, tethered by a single tow line. The crew of each boat consisted of a captain, a steersman who handled the rudder, a bowsman who assisted the lockmaster at the locks, and a mule driver or mule skinner to motivate the mules on the tow path to pull the boats. The waterway supplied jobs while being built and jobs afterwards. Mills, lumber companies, ice companies, breweries rapidly appeared, eager to ship their wares. Ice companies, you know what ice companies were? Before refrigeration, ponds would freeze, and they would go out and actually cut ice blocks, bury them in sawdust, and then bring them out in the summer, and the iceman would come around with his horse and wagon and put. That's the reason your refrigerator used to be called the ice box, because it was a box that held ice, and you got a new block of ice every day to keep your food cool. Hotels, rooming houses, saloons built to accommodate the influx of an estimated 400 canal boats traveling up and down the canal. By 1850, there were 5 hotels in New Bremen: Lemonkuhl, Meyer, Wilhelmi, Minkner, and the Lamperschneck, all of them good German names. There were 10 saloons and 6 dance halls. Don't see that now in New Bremen. The 1850 census lists a variety of occupations: brick mason, butcher, clerk, wooden shoe maker, probably from Holland, boat captain, teacher, miller, physician. Businesses include 10 cooperages. The cooperage is the place where they built barrels, hoop barrels, shaved the staves down so they fit, put the iron hoops on them. 6 shoemaker shops, 6 blacksmith shops, a carriage shop, a pork packing house, and 6 canal boats employing 6 men each. There were 302 farmers in the 1850 census. The cost of shipping goods from Cincinnati to Toledo on the canal was $12 per ton. New Bremen became a burgeoning town, exporting the hogs slaughtered and shipped from the 5 plants in New Bremen and the 6th plant in Lot 2, which was in St. Paris. We're running out of time. So if you're interested in more information on the lock, I can do a whole thing on that. I found it really interesting, which is why I kind of ended up there instead of talking about the Juneteenth so much. Yes?
Any estimate on how many of those locks have been restored from Lake Erie down to Cincinnati? Because every now and then you see a city that's got some kind of a plaque or something, maybe not a total restoration site. I'm curious, how many of them have been? Do you have any idea?
The Tip City has a lock. I think they have a lock festival every summer. Troy has a lock. Pickwood has a lock. New Bremen, I was not aware of New Bremen until I got this because I've not been up
I
to New
think
Bremen.
Middletown has a plaque of some kind, but I don't know if they've got a total restoration. The Middletown area.
Yes. So I'm sure there's it's just like
a
any,
straight line down.
yeah, if you follow the track, it's just like railroads. If for years and years and years the tracks are still there, then they pulled the tracks up. The right of way was there with the level area. Now what you're seeing now is farmers are reclaiming that. They're going in and taking the gravel and using it to fill. Down where I live, at the dark Preble County line, the railroad place, actually the one that railroad came through New Madison and that the Lincoln train went on. You can see where the old bridge abutments are there where they used to cross. You can see some places where there's a big ridge between two fields that nobody can get across. But then if you go down to the bigger fields, they flatten it all out and bulldozed it out and it's a field straight across. So the canals are the same way. Many were filled in, but many were just left. And if you look in the woods, you can see woods growing up all over, but there's a big deep depression there that's kind of silted in as time has gone by. So history changes the situation, changes the landscape, but it doesn't change it very fast. Another example is the barns. Every farm, every 40 acres used to have a barn. You can see some of the remnants of those still falling down, and you can see a couple that are still there, and people have maintained them. The old-fashioned gable-end barn or bank barn are just disappearing because nobody wants to spend the money. Nobody needs them, for one thing. People now have 20 horses, maybe an indoor place for their daughter to ride dressage and jumping and all that. An old wooden barn with a hayloft is of no use to those people. So now you find big metal buildings to store giant farm equipment. And the barns are disappearing. And like I showed you last week, the fields are disappearing. The fields are becoming like 1,000-acre flat plots. Life is changing, and like everybody, I'm glad that I lived when I lived because I got to experience a lot of the things that the kids in the future won't know.
I didn't understand what the picture is.
This is the lock of New Bremen. This is the actual, they've closed it off because it's and what happened was in 1913, anybody know what happened in 1913 as far as natural devastation? There was a huge giant flood that came all the way through the Miami Valley. And that basically washed out a lot of the locks. And because there was no tourist potential in 1913, it wasn't worth the money to build it back up again. New Bremen, for some reason, replaced the wooden walls with concrete. I read that, but I can't remember exactly what the rationale was. I think they were trying to do a tourist thing. So they maintained their lock. It's not a working lock. The locks don't open and close, but they maintained the lock as kind of a tourist attraction. And that happened in the 1860s as the railroad came along, and the canal boats were phased out because the railroads were faster and cheaper than the canal boats. When they quit using canal boats, they quit maintaining the canals. They silted in, the locks began to disintegrate. And it's just like anything else. It's like the barns you see out in the country. If nobody maintains them, they eventually fall apart and collapse. So this is New Bremen's lock with the two sidewalls there, but there's no operating lock in there.
Were there canals built to feed into this main Miami-Erie canal?
Not that I'm aware of.
What's the canal around Metamora?
That's part of the same. Well, that's not part of this one, but Indiana had their own. This is the Ohio from Cincinnati, because if you also notice, the Erie Canal was the famous one of the first canals built that paralleled the St. Lawrence River from New York to the upper areas of New York. The canals were all over. They're like railroads, not as many as there were railroads.
So they didn't necessarily intersect, but they served a particular corridor.
I think they basically channeled to a large river where they could get the material on down. So, yeah, and I'm not sure, because I've been to Metamora, they have the train ride that goes from Connersville to Metamora, and that's a fun thing to do.
That built a work railroad,
Yes.
like a sealed trough, water trough.
Yes.
If you've not been to, New Bremen recently, I don't know when it was put in. I know they maintained the locks for many years, but they have redone their downtown. They have a huge pavilion in the middle of town, beautifully built, design. It's well worth a mini trip to New Bremen.
which is another possibility. If, you know, we used to go up to whoever the guy was that had the German restaurant for
Fred.
sales.
Red Fire.
Yeah, Fred. If anybody wants to, yeah, Minster. If anybody's interested in German food, we can go to New Bremen and have German food and look at the locks. So I would be interested in doing that. So, okay, comments? So I hope this wasn't too off the wall or too boring. And I apologize if anybody expected a ton of stuff on Juneteenth. But it all fits together. History is kind of one part, then you do another part.
How many states again really have basically counteracted, if you will, politically Juneteenth? You name
1,
them.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, North and South Carolina.
I don't recall reading anything about that. I'm sure it's in the news, but is there a pushback to that? I'm sure
Well,
they can do that legally.
This was in an article about Juneteenth because they don't tell you. It's just like everything else with racism. They don't come out and say, I'm a racist. They come out and say, it's just like our past president running for president. I did more for black people than anybody except Lincoln. And some people believe that.
Okay. So they basically, the legislature, they just changed the name of it.
They just
because
changed
they knew by federal law they had.
By federal law, the post office was going to be closed. They started out not letting the state workers off. And then somebody sued and said, it's a federal holiday, you have to let state workers off too, is my understanding. And then they said, well, if we're going to let the state workers off, then we're going to call it Robert E. Lee Day. So it'll be Robert E. Lee Day in big letters, and maybe down at the bottom will be Juneteenth. So it's the same way as they work around all these other, you can work around any legal problem, just ask a lawyer. One of the most amazing things, we had to go through Indianapolis, and if you know, 465 is closed for construction, so we had to take 38th Street to get from Interstate 74, which goes to Bloomington, to get to Interstate 70, which goes to Dayton. There were, I think there was at least 6 giant billboards for lawyers. Truck accident, call, Bob Blow. Utility delivery van accident. If the UPS truck runs into you, there's a lawyer that'll sue for that. Motorcycle accident. Every one of them had a different thing that they concentrated on, but all of them were, get big money, we'll fight for you. It's like, talk about ambulance chasers. And I've run into that with the people I run into. Everybody wants to sue somebody because they think they can get free money out of it. And sometimes they do because the lawyers make it so problematic that they settle it. And the lawyers get half the money or a third of it or whatever, but the person who's filing the lawsuit gets money for doing absolutely nothing. So it's another situation set up to screw people. I mean, it's just, I can see why people want to limit that. But when they limit it for everybody, they limit it for people who have legitimate grievances. Some people have actually been harmed. I told you about the guy that was killed at the hospital because of negligence of the doctor. Literally a true negligence. The nurses, we called him 20 times saying, this guy is going into crisis, he's dying. He said, oh, he's faking it. You're at home, you don't know what he's doing. We're here, we're taking his blood pressure, we're looking at his face, we're talking to him. He's not faking it, he's dying. And he did die. So they got sued and they settled. So there are malpractice things that happen. So. Okay, let's see, where are we? Offering. What's our offering song?
Around the world.
Around the World. If you have something to put in, please do. hymn is 66, When the Summer Sun is Shining. Juneteenth celebrations that nobody hears about. Has anybody heard about Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921?
Yes.
It's called the Tulsa Massacre. Over 300 black families, women, children, and men were murdered by the white population of Tulsa, Oklahoma. There was an area there called the Black Wall Street, a 25-block area of successful barbershops, clothing stores, grocery stores, engineering degrees, all kinds of builders' places. The white people got incensed at black people for something. I'm not sure. I think the reason for it were kind of get lost in the mist of time. But the blacks, in this case, armed themselves and tried to defend themselves. And the white population, they even said in the National Guard, was not going to split up for them. So there is one woman who is still alive. She sued the city of Tulsa. She's like 105 or 103 years old. The Supreme Court of Tulsa voted or ruled against her, so they get no recompense, no reconciliation, not even an apology, except for the fact that the city of Tulsa built a museum to celebrate this, and the city of Tulsa makes the money, but they don't give any of the money to the people who suffered the indignities and were the victims of the massacre. Yes.
When did all this happen?
This was in 1921, not that long ago. 300 people, they burned the city to the ground, buried people in unmarked graves. They're still trying to find the people. They're still trying to get numbers and who the people were that were killed. 300 and some people, and that's just a rough estimate number of the people who were missing. Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the state of Oklahoma and everything else continues to deny that there's anything really serious. It's called a civil insurrection or a riot or something. But they make it sound like, and they made it sound like right afterwards that the blacks were the one, the black population was the one that were rioting, when it was the other way around. They were the victims. I think there were like 26 whites killed and 300 blacks, because the blacks did have guns and they did try to defend themselves, but they were overwhelmed by a giant white mob and including National Guard troops. So we can do a little history on that if you want to. That was a kind of an interesting thing. All this stuff kind of all flowed together, so and it all kind of belongs together. Yes.
Are there still black people living there?
Yes, a lot of people still live in Tulsa, and a lot of black people live in Oklahoma, and they're trying to. But it's just like this guy said here. They've been oppressed for years, and when people tell you there's no more racism because we had a black president, I mean, you know, from seeing the way the world is where we live, that there's still racism there. There's still oppression for LGBTQ people are being oppressed. Freedom is not there for everybody yet. It's up to us to do whatever we can do to help that along. Okay, extinguishing the chalice. The world aches for us to join together and bring about healing, toil for justice, and produce ever-increasing love. This is our calling. Go forth and act accordingly. Amen. And as our Juneteenth thing, you know about the Buffalo Soldiers. Almost a third of the cowboys in the Old West were black. A lot of people don't recognize that. The Buffalo Soldiers were constituted after the Civil War, and many of them had real problems because they were sent out to kill Indians, which they understood to be another oppressed race. I'm sure you've seen the T-shirts and things. We should have built a wall in 1700 to keep the immigrants out. There's some irony all over the place. So. All right, we're going to hear Summertime, which is perfect. Summertime. You can almost hear the sweat dripping off the music. We're going to leave our candle as usual lit for all those suffering, for all those who have had loss, for all those who have hopes and dreams blocked. The candle is there in our hearts. There's coffee. If anybody wants coffee, I brought up the apple juice. It's been sitting out for a while, but it's probably still cool. And of course, there's donuts.
Great.
Cool.